My guest today is Tinashe Peter, a cultural and political commentator who has been outspoken about Israel, anti-Semitism, ideological extremism, and the growing moral confusion in the West. Over the past couple of years, we've watched something disturbing happen. Voices calling themselves anti-establishment or truth-seeking have become comfortable excusing jihadist ideology, minimizing anti-Semitism, or attacking Jews in Israel under the banner of just asking questions. What makes this moment dangerous is that much of this isn't coming from the left, it's coming from inside the right. Tinashe has been one of the clearest voices calling this out, not from a partisan angle, but from a place of moral clarity. Today, we're going to talk about Israel, anti-Semitism, ideological deception, and why Israel has become the ultimate litmus test for truth in our time. Tinashe, thank you for being here.
And thank you for having me, Daniel. I appreciate it. It is an honor.
You've said that Israel has become a kind of a truth test for people.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So, okay, I have, two perspectives. One side is the sort of social political aspect, and then the other side is theological, right? So, on the side of politics, I think it is the clearest. I think it's the most obvious as far as there has been an obvious triggering on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to this one specific issue. When you talk about just the quote unquote Palestinian movement or Palestinian ideology, on the left, they are gung ho, they're sold out, they're all for it. You go to the right and you could find differing opinions. However, when it comes to the Jewish people or Israel specifically, everybody has an opinion. And so, for me, being somebody who's not necessarily politically minded, I never came from that necessary standpoint. It just so happened to be something I fell more and more into once I started understanding, some of these more social dynamics that were playing out, and that you can't leave out the political, let alone the spiritual aspect of this. So, to come back to your question, I see it as, on the political standpoint, if you have no basis or factual basis for your perspective on a specific group of people not having the right to exist, because that's how far it's gotten, right? For somebody like myself, I would say, well, where do you get that opinion? Because when any other group of people are marginalized, when any other group of people are being oppressed and actively attacked, you seem to stand on their side. But yet this one group of people are the special case. And so, there was that dissonance that I saw. And then on the theological standpoint, where I thought I would never see this unraveling, which is in the church, right? And I just got off of a call with a buddy of mine, David Halevi, who is a believing Jew himself. And he wrote a book, The Rooted Kingdom, and it ties Israel and the true identity of Israel with the true identity of the nations and, what is oftentimes called the church and then the kingdom. And so the discussion that we oftentimes have on this side of the spectrum is, how can one call themselves a Christian or a believer in Yeshua while at the same time holding this opinion that the Jewish people are irrelevant, or in some cases that God has done away with the very people that he moved prophecy through. And so for somebody like me, that level of dissonance is strange. And when you have people with these strong opinions, especially negative opinions, when there's nothing to really root it, then for me, it's okay. This is a breaking point, right? This is obviously a point of contention for all. And so it was easy for me to pick a side.
Why do you think it is that Israel is treated differently than every other nation when it comes to legitimacy, to defense, moral judgment?
Well, to get down to the root, it is spiritual, right? I believe that this begins in the ethereal unseen, which is more real than the seen. This begins with a battle between good and evil. Simple as that. And so, again, as far as I'm concerned, this is my end all be all. What is God's word? What does God have to say? And so when you start to understand historically who the Jewish people are, right? The children of Israel, Israel being a literal person in Jacob. And this is our westernized way of even saying many of these names. So here you have a nation that was built from no nation at all, from a literal barren womb of Sarah. And here you have a promise that was made to Abram, who then becomes Abraham. So again, from the beginning, you have God proclaiming something from the very beginning of scripture, which is, I will make you a great nation and you will possess this land that I've specifically designated, and this will be an everlasting covenant. And so for me as a believer, That's why with the left, I'm like, okay, I get them. They're godless. They essentially fear nothing besides the state, I guess. But as somebody who claims to be conservative or believer, I would think that this would be, kind of common knowledge. And so that is the root system of it, which is the devil, the enemy of our souls, has always been after the very promise of God. Because if you can compromise this promise and the fulfillment of that promise, then you can compromise the entire thing. And of course, he is on a losing side and it's a losing battle. However, as we're in it and this thing is playing out, we see it then playing out in the physical. When it comes to now the physical root structure, as far as political, etc., I say, and Thomas Sowell is probably one of the best ones to articulate this, which is if you want the Jewish people to stop being hated in the world, they need to stop succeeding. Like if you, and that probably still wouldn't help. If you want them to not be hated, let them be downtrodden, let them allow all that they've gone through to define them, right? Let them be complaining like everybody else about oppression, which everybody has faced at some level. And again, we have this historically documented. We want to talk about slavery in Egypt, and we want to talk about as recently as October 7th and everything in between. And yet here's a people who continues to rise up. And I believe it's because God has always had his hand on his promise. It's not because these only ones he loves. As a matter of fact, he loved us all so much that he moved his plan of prophecy through these people that he chose. Simple as that. So yeah, the root is spiritual, and then it shows itself in the physical. That's my own personal perspective.
Now, as you mentioned, over the last couple of years, we've seen anti-Semitism emerge openly on the right, not just the left. Did that surprise you? And what are your thoughts about these self-described conservatives who start suddenly attacking Jews, claiming to defend Western civilization? What are your thoughts on that?
So, was I surprised? This was probably the biggest shock that I've had. And this is coming from a guy who November 4th, 2024 was the first time I ever put out a video stating in any way that I was not a liberal, right? Because they assume because I'm black that I have to be a liberal. And I lost 1,500 followers on my Instagram in a span of 2.5, 3 days. People cursing me out, like people I thought were forever followers who were telling me explicitly, I'm unfollowing you, I can't believe you, how could you, etc. And so that was the first kind of shock that I had, stepping into this world, not knowing that 6 months later, I was going to find myself in probably the most treacherous waters. Yeah, the shock, I think, has come from the reaction that I've received simply standing with what I know is right. Like when I say know is right, I'm speaking, let's say, specifically of October 7th, right? I can't stand with anybody on every issue. No human being, only God and God alone, right? But when it comes to specific issues, and this was the issue of the day, which is October 7th, was it justified? Was it not? My shock was I'm being attacked, even having my life threatened because I'm stating that Hamas and all of their sympathizers, which is most of these so-called Palestinians, are wrong for wanting to genocide the Jewish people. You know what I mean? What am I missing on this one? And so yeah, that was the most surprising thing for me is I'm getting attacked not just from the left. I expect that. Any deviation from their dogma is going to be worthy of an attack and cancellation. But now I have guys who claim to be Christians and Christian conservatives and have these Christian values. And it's not even just the radical, far right, neo Nazi individual, shaved head with the swastika. No, it's not just that guy anymore. It's your regular Joe who goes to church every Sunday and and claims to know Christ, and then if you use the word Yeshua, gets offended and calls you a Israeli asset, Mossad, 7K club. So for me, it was different sequences of being surprised how this was happening on what I believe to be the side that I've kind of found a home in.
Now, how do you think conspiracy theories become a gateway to anti-Semitism?
I mean, I think you can't separate the two. When you think about what are the beliefs that people are holding about Jewish people, and it's interesting for me personally because I've lived in areas where there are predominantly Muslims. I've lived in areas where there are, or worked in areas where there are predominantly Jews, Orthodox, right? So the average person has an opinion without ever having met, let's say, a Jew, haven't had a conversation, let alone being steeped in their own culture. and there's stores and, there's kosher stores here. And then when I go home, there's halal stores. Like when you're in the midst of it, you get to have a different relationship with it. And so the conspiracies exist in a world where these people are not actually connected to this culture in any way. And so what do they have? They have social media videos, they have these guys in their grandma's basement, right, conjuring up stories to excuse whatever it is that's lacking in their own lives. And so I believe it is, it's the bedrock of the social aspect of Jew hate is stories about a people you know nothing about. And so you got to make something up. Why are there so many Jewish bankers? Maybe you would like to research that. No, I'd rather just state that this has to do with, some nefarious reason and they're all controlling the world. And that's the reason why I can't get a loan or I can't get a job or my wife left me. The perfect scapegoat in essence.
Do you see anti-Semitism as ignorance or as something more intentional or a mix of both?
Yeah, I definitely think it's both. There is a crowd out there. And I mean, I don't want to seem like I don't want to seem like I'm on some sort of negative side of this spectrum to like kind of conjure up this drama. But unfortunately, there is such a small number that I've experienced of people who are just ignorant because the responses that I get, the messages that I get, when I get a message of a young man or young woman, whoever it is, and they say, thank you so much. Like yesterday, I received one and it made my night. Right now, this is coming from hundreds or, sometimes thousands of different messages, comments, and things of that nature. And so when I get a message like that, it resonates, it hits, but also there's the contrast side of it, which is why is this not the norm? And so that's the ignorant aspect. 22-year-old kid surrounded by this information, individuals who believe in the very same stuff. I mean, their entire world is a reward system for Jew hate, right? Because it's trendy, it's cultural, it's, you have no skin in the game, so you can just really run with the tropes and it means nothing to you. And so for that kid, he's the one out of the 50, right? Who can not only see through it, but is brave enough to say, you know what, this is wrong and I'm not going to stand with this. It doesn't mean I have to become the champion of Israel. They might have no full concept or context. Again, for me as a believer, you can't separate the two. And then there's the other side where this is a majority of what I come across on a daily basis, which is there is something beneficial to them about hating the Jewish people. So social currency, like I say, you could kind of know, and this is the thing that really gets to me, Daniel, you could kind of know that there's something off about this. Let's say an Andrew Tate, right? He's in the video, the viral video from yesterday with all the guys in a club and they're listening to, that song, which ironically enough, nobody's addressed the Kanye sitting with the rabbi, but put that to the side for a second. So you have that moment, and then the next day he's on Patrick Bet-David's platform, and he's trying to basically reel it all back and, debunk all these conspiracies around Jewish people and how if guys just had a girlfriend and, money in their pocket or could buy a house, then they'd stop being anti-Semitic. So for me, I'm like, okay, you have enough understanding to see that there's something off about this. You as an influencer, but yet when it's time for lights, camera, action, it's the complete opposite. And to me, you're just as bad, if not worse, than the ignorant individual, if you know. And I see a lot of that where they play along with it. It's a game for them. I'm talking to a young lady who I'm going to be helping, build up her platform and get her out there. Her name is Avi. She is a Jewish believer herself. And she's, very young. And so she's in this. She's, raptured with this stuff. And she sent me some pictures yesterday. And these kids are, during exam season, they're like, oh, this was my, my promise from 3,000 years ago. And, that sort of stuff. And I'm like, these are 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. And they might know, wow, this is kind of messed up. Why are we bullying this person? But they'll still do it anyway. And sad for a kid, let alone a 30, 40, or 50-year-old man or woman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what confuses me is you have people like Candace Owens who shifted dramatically in how she speaks about Jews and Israel. What do you think changed? It just seems like it's going off the deep end. I mean, she's not the only one, but
Yeah, of course.
she's the leader of the pack, I think.
So when it comes to Candace, I got an interesting sort of relationship with Candace because when I was having my sort of political awakening around 8, 9 years ago now, when Trump was making his way onto the political scene, she was one of the earliest voices that I listened to. Ironically, it was her, it was Ben, right? Then there was guys, off kilter like the Crowders, etc. But these were two voices that I remember clear as day. I'm in the Bay Area. It's the hub of wokeness. And I'm like hiding my laptop as I'm listening to these people, like, please, nobody see me in here listening to Candace or Ben Shapiro. So, back then, it seemed that she was somebody with a level of moral clarity around most issues. And so, of course, it would feed into the conversation about Israel and the Jewish people. It just made sense for me to say, well, you would kind of have an understanding about everything. And, it's like, okay, if the whole, black narrative in America, which is essentially that black people are victims and they can't do nothing, and there's this glass ceiling, and it's a different experience for them than anybody else in this current era, which is a lie. And then, of course, you start to research deeper for yourself and get into actual statistics, that old thing. She was clear as day when it came to me. Now, I never would have assumed that maybe she's playing along with something, because with her, I think you have people who are slightly different, but I do believe her to be a malignant narcissist. I believe there's a personality trait there that feeds into it as much as the spiritual bankruptcy. So, yeah, I mean, I think that switch happened as far as she's concerned. I think it happened as a result of her sort of socially climbing. Because if you see in the beginning, there's people that I have behind the scenes, I won't mention names, but who work with her early on. And maybe they gave an opportunity. And then as soon as she, kind of got a rise from there, sort of forget, set, sorry, don't have time for you anymore on a better, bigger and better things. And then, she gets the Kanye tweet, which was like one of her big moments, her explosive moments. All he said was, I like the way that Candace Owens thinks. And I believe this was right after she had left PragerU. So, use them. Thank you. Next. And then she finds her way to Daily Wire. And what's interesting to me is, she was holding a lot of these beliefs kind of at bay when she was at Daily Wire. I even one of the videos that I was doing a little breakdown of, she was on the Daily Wire while talking about some of these conspiracies. And so, I believe that Jeremy and Ben sort of gave her some leg room and let her stretch out a little bit, and then finally did the right thing and got rid of her because they saw what they saw. So again, it's like, was this night and day change? Even Charlie distancing himself, right? Was it a night and day change? I honestly don't think so. I think she was hopping on whatever bandwagon, because before she had her conservative awakening, she was a leftist. She was running this doxing website that was doxing right wing and conservative opinions. And so, I think it's just like an opportunist, somebody who will go wherever the attention is. And when it comes to Jewish propaganda, it is, unfortunately, in this world system that we're currently in, it is incredibly profitable in every generation, whether you're Karl Marx, whether you are Adolf, whether you are Yasser Arafat, like it, and you are Candace Owens of today, they know that they can find an audience there. And so, yeah, this is just me. Some people may believe, oh, she really used to believe what she believed. When I look back now, I say she believed whatever she needed to for the platform she was given.
Now, something that I heard was there was some change after she got married, that her husband has a certain view, I guess the replacement theology and things like that. I think her husband has some influence. Then you also hear about Qatar and all that stuff, which I don't know. Seems like there's a couple things going on at the same time.
So with the Carlson, the old Qatari puppet himself, with that guy, I believe there are a few factors playing. And like, I don't believe Candace is motivated by money. A lot of people believe that. I don't. I believe she is motivated by her and status and being worshipped like Lucifer. I genuinely believe that, right? It is about praise. That's why she loves having a cult. It's about her little in group. If you see a lot of these cult leaders and their personality types, it's the same thing, paralleled. When it comes to Carlson, the old Carlson, yeah, that's definitely who's in my pocket at one point in time. Because this is the same guy, who does a little bit of Russian propaganda on a Tuesday, a little bit of Iranian propaganda on a Thursday, and then, ends his Friday and Saturday and Sunday and Monday with a little bit of Jewish propaganda. This is a guy who does indeed have his ties in Jew hatred. I don't call it anti-Semitism because it is what it is. It's Jew hatred, right? They're not anti. They're filled with hate. Like, there's a level where it's like, anti-Zionism. Okay, there are some people I can say that believe the idea of Zionism, whatever they think it is, to be invalid. Fantastic. But if you believe that a group of people don't deserve to exist, that's hatred. There's no other word for it. So anyway, to the point at hand, we have Carlson. I believe he's paid. I believe he goes to the highest bidder. I believe he has no moral compass. And then to touch a little bit on the George Farmer situation with Candace, it's interesting because people pick each other for a reason, right? There's stories out there saying that he might be connected to some of the intelligence agencies in the UK, and they found opportunity with that, etc. And I can't know about those things. What I do know is that these two individuals claim to have met and got married within 3 weeks, right? Haven't seen each other once. Sounds strange to me, but hey, who am I to judge? And maybe it was a love at first sight, even though he claims there was nothing romantic. What do I know? So, as far as the suspicious activities, like you stated, this specific sect of Catholicism within Catholicism that holds on to these not just replacement theology by itself, but also holds on to the conspiracies about Jewish people, right? Inherently. Because there are some Christians who just are biblically illiterate, right? They claim to be believers, but they haven't actually read through the text. They haven't dipped into the actual Hebrew context. They think the Old Testament is just this old thing and it's played out, as opposed to, okay, the 5 books of Moses, and here we have the books of the prophet, and here we have the right. None of that exists in their psyche. It's like every Sunday they get a little, something out of context, and then they get sent home. So there's some folks who have that level of replacement theology, and then there are those who are just fully bought into the Jew hate. And truth be told, I don't know how you could exist with a Candace if you're not that yourself. So I would believe that about George, right? He's not there like, no, no, please, calm down. Let me educate you. I don't think those are the type of conversations going on at home.
Yeah. Apparently, his father has completely different views, which is interesting. Speaking of Tucker Carlson, it's very interesting that in Iran they were playing his clips on national television when everything else was blacked out.
Yeah.
I guess that says something. But what responsibility do you think that these large platforms have when they amplify suspicion without evidence? They push out these conspiracies. How much of a responsibility do they have on shaping the minds of millions of people?
So, I remember hearing a quote from, I think it was like Lil Wayne, right, who was a rapper who used to be big in like the 2000s, etc. And he was asked the same question about him and the type of music he was putting out. And he said, well, it's the parents' duty, and I just make the music. And back then I thought to myself, I mean, he's kind of right? Who are they being, exposed to, etc. But as a man now, I say, no, you have a platform, which means you inherently have responsibility. In the same way a parent has responsibility in the household, every single one of us, you, Daniel, have responsibility with a platform that God has given you. I have a responsibility with the platform that God has given me, right? And so I believe that they don't necessarily see it that way. If you look at like the Myron Gaines, or Amru Fadils and Andrew Tates and all these sort of guys, I think they could care less about the responsibility, but it doesn't negate or take away. And I believe that when judgment comes, they're going to have to face every single word. I believe that every word, every intention, every thought, all of it is going to be under judgment. You are responsible. You were given something that is influencing millions of people's lives, more specifically, kids' lives. That's why I'm like Miss Rachel, I've been on her. You have no business in this space unless you're going to be equal. I don't want to hear left or right unless you're going to talk left and right. I don't want to hear, I don't need JD Vance on your show. I don't need Zora Mamdani on your show. But if you're going to have one, then have both, right? That's how I see it with those sort of platforms talking to I don't need any of them because, these are little infants she's talking to. But, again, these guys who know they have a young audience, and more specifically, they have the ear of young men, which most of this is really being pushed there, right? The girls most of them are being pushed to the left wing, and, this liberalism, et cetera. They got their own issues um, they're currently undertaking. Again, I can only look at it from my perspective to say every time I speak, every time I turn a camera on or whatever it is, I'm speaking to somebody. And so that has the potential to influence that somebody, let alone if I'm reaching millions of people. At the very least, 10 of those people are going to be influenced, which means their decision-making process is going to be changed. Now, again, would it be best if the parents or whoever's in that household were handling that? Absolutely. Parents, stay vigilant. It's a responsibility. But realistically, we live in a world where our kids can't just be in our hands 20, right? And so they're exposed. Maybe they don't have a phone. Maybe their friends do. And their friends are being, you know, uh, uh, um, inundated with this sort of stuff. And so again, for me, I say, if you call yourself a helper, because a lot of these do, they say, I am informing you, I'm telling you the truth, I'm educating you. It's not entertainment, it's not Mr. Beast, right? Like, that's not the concern here, and I'd even look at some of the entertainers, the streamers, et cetera, to say, step out of the political realm and just keep it entertainment. Otherwise, you're now having a responsibility that is on your shoulders. When you say that you're connecting with the truth, now you're bringing God into the conversation.
Now you have people like Tucker Carlson's that claim to oppose war and division, yet they consistently attack Israel. They minimize jihadist threats. Why do you think that Israel becomes the villain in these narratives that claim to be anti-war? How do you interpret that?
Well, it's interesting because right now, Iran is having its revolution, and these usual suspects I mean, definitely quiet. It's incredible. Like, on one side you have they're like, the Candaces of the world, who she's already had her moment because, again, she just can't keep her mouth shut. Tucker's a little more calculated. And so he's waited to basically not say anything until, and then make assertions and then get somebody on a show who's going to, kind of play the fool for him. So I believe that, again, it's the no Jews, no news thing, right? That's essentially what's playing out. And I want to use this specific, well, it's really a slaughtering of the people by a tyrannical government as an example. Why is Iran being ignored by these people who are so-called anti-neocon or whatever it is? Well, it's because the Persian people and the Jewish people have a multi-thousand-year relationship, and they both know that. And that has never been lost, no matter what jihadists took over, their government or whatever it may be, right? That is a relationship that has been essentially established by Hashem himself. So as far as being bothered, if there's a Jewish connection, then they'll either leave it alone, like they did with, the Drew situation, right? When all of a sudden the Syrian, I forget what it was, if it was one of the government official buildings, is hit as a retaliation to this attack on the Druze people. And then all of a sudden you have Western outlets, "Oh, look at what Israel's doing." And then you have the Druze people coming out in support, and then it's silence once again. So, there is a double standard. It's always that way. It's, well, okay, you get poked, you get stabbed, and you have to pat the guy on the back if you are Israel. It's, but if you get poked once and you are America or any of these other nations, then you can go ahead and just slaughter. You can behead, basically. And that's perfectly fine. Or if you are, quote unquote, Palestine, which is not a real thing, by the way. We can call it many things, but it's not that. You can essentially get away with whatever you want because you are the victim. And there is like a sort of leftist narrative, which is why I really didn't get into it, because we're mostly talking about the conservative side, but this idea that Jews are white people and white people bad, right? I mean, most of these people have probably never run into a, Mizrahi, or, I mean, they've probably never met a Jew, let alone actually, Ethiopian or Ethiopic Jew. None of that existed in their mind. It's just the white man, So whiteness is equated to colonizer. It's equated to, the ones who go out and conquer, take over, pillage. It's only white men in the eyes of the woke left. And I do believe that some of that is seeping into the right inadvertently with the kind of horseshoe theory. And so again, if the Jewish man does it, then it's the white man doing it, and therefore white man bad, right? It's like America, Trump. Trump is white man. White man went to go get brown man bad. No, Trump went to get a dictator to help to free the people who are now celebrating him, which are brown people, right? It's baffling on that side, but then I also bring it back to, again, the spiritual core of this thing, the spiritual foundation, God's chosen people and his chosen land, and the perpetual attack on it. And so many people who are spiritually blind and spiritually void are going off of that same thing. Because if you notice, when somebody starts to pick these ideas up and then they start to give themselves over to it, you see a shift. And that's when you see a shift, right? That's when you see something in them snaps almost. Like, I'm looking at this girl, Brett Cooper, who used to just be a kind of almost middle of the ground. You would almost think like libertarian, kind of conservative, and she was on the Daily Wire. And now I saw the most recent video of her, and she's like, well, I think Sneeko and Fuentes have aura. What? That's what you get after that moment of them singing Heil Hitler, is they have aura? Okay. So yeah, once again, the spiritual aspect cannot be avoided, but when it comes to social, political, it's always the double standard. It's something I used to see before I was even interested, let alone knew what was going on, right? I was not politically motivated, but for some reason, every conspiracy that I heard, every Alex Jones show, whatever, somehow it always came back to a Jew. And, to a certain extent, it's like, oh, okay, maybe there's a grand conspiracy. But then when you start to put logic in there, it starts to kind of fall apart.
Yeah. Now, what are the dangers of pretending that jihadist ideology is exaggerated or imaginary? Is this also ignorance, or is this an ideological alignment with them?
Yeah, so the right is ignorance and the left is alignment. And here's why, and again, I'm speaking obviously generalities. So with the right, because you're so consumed with the wrong enemy, like this is one of the points I wish I could just hammer home if I could hammer anything home, is to say when you're calling Israel your greatest threat and enemy, Israel, right? We're not Russia, China, nobody makes it's Israel. Okay, then what do? You look over here to this guy while your actual enemy is circling the camp and ready to attack. And that's exactly what's happened to us in the Western world. We have a friend, and no friend is perfect, but it has been a good friend. Vice versa, right? America's been a great friend to the Jewish people, to Israel, to Israelis, and vice versa. It's not been perfect because what relationship is. Sometimes you bicker and fight. Sometimes you don't, they don't see eye to eye, but there's an understanding, or it has been time past, an understanding that we are friends. We're in this together. We need each other because we're fighting the same fight. If we really believe in this thing called democracy, then we're fighting the same fight because we know the threat because we're surrounded by it and we're faced by it every single day. And you have an idea of the threat because it's hit your soil at a certain point in time. And so now you have a generation that's not only forgetting, which is dangerous, but you also have a generation that has had the entire narrative flipped. Instead of, man, we remember what jihadists did to your aunties, uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers, your brother, your sister on September 11th. Now it was the Jews. That right there got your focus from, okay, these people we need to look at, right? The jihadists, those who are calling for this globalized intifada, we need to look into this. No, instead, they're focusing on deepening their research on Jewish conspiracies. And so they're completely blind to a reality of who is an actual enemy. Why? Because they call you an enemy. They're not an enemy because you made them an enemy because you just want enemies. They're an enemy because they say you need to be destroyed, period. And it's the same thing that is currently happening to the very people you have in your mind are your enemy. It's the greatest ploy of the devil. I'll be honest, it's ingenious. And so, yes, that's what's going on the right. On the left, communists are violent in nature. They are power hungry in nature. We forget this because they sell us the mumdamification of it, right? The smiling face and the bright colors and, commercials with Miss Rachel. But in reality, it is always about power. And so for them, they understand the language of the jihadist because they're about power. They're just explicit about it, right? We're out to control. We want submission. It's written in our very, not just doctrine, in the name itself. Submit or what? Or die. If you look at the leftist, especially today's leftist, it's submit or die. And so, yeah, this threat of jihadism, again, that's been, as much time as I spent about just debunking these lies about Israel and the Jewish people, where my heart is at. And, I'll forever be accused. And so I just started wearing it, by the way. I was like, you know what? Let me drop merch about it. Let me, like, if you're going to call me a shill and a Zionist, whatever, then yes, I am a Zionist. I'm a Christian Zionist, unapologetically. So, back to the point, as far as jihad, I understand what it is because I look at things from a realistic standpoint, which is, and it's real simple. You don't have to be a geopolitical expert or any of that. You just have to go, okay, why are these things happening? For example, October 7th. Why did it happen? It happened because these people hate these people and they want to see these people dead. When you break it down to just that, because that's what it was, and that's what it's always been. Well, why was he bringing in Jews into his own country? There's the only genocide in history where people were brought in. Other genocides, they were okay with the people just leaving. They didn't want them there. Your cockroaches, your rats, your whatever, we don't want you here. But here you have somebody who's so possessed that he's bringing them in. What mentality is that? So if you're somebody who can go, yeah, I see his point, then you've already shown yourself to be aligned demonically. There's no way that can be of God because there's only two ways. There's no way. That can't be of good. If I heard that my neighbor had their house broken into and their entire family slaughtered and their daughter taken as a hostage and she was violated and the father now has to go and get his kids, everybody in the room would say that father should take out the entire family lineage. He has every right to do so. But instead, the father goes, I want my child back and I want to take out the one who took out my child. And so I want to spare everybody else. Let me send them text messages and make sure they know I'm on my way. Right? I like to humanize things. Everybody in a room, maybe except for one or two genuine psychopaths, would say, absolutely, I would stand with that. And then you tell them that that father is it, and all of a sudden it falls apart.
Now, you turn on a show like Piers Morgan, and they're debating. He's got Hank Uger, he's got a Kasparian, but it seems like you can't have a normal conversation with them because the Israel side is spitting facts, but
Yeah.
they can't hear facts. They have to yell and scream and curse. And just how do you explain that and how they act when it comes to Israel? It seems like they just go crazy.
Yeah, I mean, again, they're possessed. They are literally possessed by this thing. I called her, Anna Luciferian is my new name for her. I put in a video a couple of days ago. And she was called out. I forget exactly who it was, but it was on Piers Morgan's show. And, it was a statement about how, well, with Iran, all of a sudden she doesn't know if the numbers are accurate and we need to hold our horses. Maybe it was a few hundred, not a few thousand who were massacred, right? Because that matters. Oh, yeah. Few hundred, okay, we can let the thing go. Few thousand. So she has that moment, and then all of a sudden, I think it was Piers himself actually who called it out and said, wait, but if we said that about Gaza, and all of a sudden you just saw this thing shift in her, right? And in that moment, I said, yeah, because that's what it is to be possessed by something. It is not just obsessed, it is now possessed. It owns you, right? There's a level of obsession where it's like, okay, you're on the fringe and you're just into something, but now you're owned by this idea. And again, it is a unique thing in that way where, if you look back at periods of time, you could say there was, this specific hatred towards the Armenians here, right? Specific hatred towards, Africans of the diaspora here, specific hatred of fill in the gap here. But when you look throughout the entire landscape of history, you can see, from the days of Pharaoh, right? Then spanning to the days of Herod, and it's, oh, well, we need to eliminate every single one of their children. Hashem is oftentimes held to this strange sort of thing where it's like, well, why did he take out all the firstborns of the Egyptians? I'm like, did you read the entire thing? Did you miss the part where every single Jewish baby was being slaughtered? Every single male was being killed at birth? Did we miss that part? And so again, when you start to get that context, you see the full story. When you have somebody like an Anna Kasparian or whatever it is, I don't know what it is that was at the core ideologically. Ironically, she is, I believe, Armenian in descent, which maybe I'm not getting something there, but I would suspect that having a history like that, where your people went through a genocide, you would at least have maybe compassion, maybe not empathy, but at the very least, like a level of sympathy where it's like, okay, they've been through something, right? In just, again, October 7th, let alone before, and we can go to thousands of individualized cases of jihad in Israel that people facing every day that don't even make the news cycles. It's like here we had the assassination of Yaron and Sarah. Oh, sorry, Yaron and Sarah. Yeah, that happened in Washington, D.C. Two 20-something-year-olds, or they say that he might have been 30, she was 26, and they were assassinated, killed in broad daylight by a jihadist. Why do I say that? Because he yelled free, free Palestine as he did it. That story about anybody else, like think about it right now, right? They're having these Renee Good marches and, these vigils all across the country, etc. I didn't see a single vigil by these people. And these were two individuals who were targeted because they were Jewish or perceived to be Jewish. Perceived. And where was our Anna Kasparian there? Where was Cenk?
There's a clip of her saying that I don't have a problem with the people, I have a problem with the government. And then there's another clip saying that you people are hated all over the world. She has to make up her mind.
Yeah. It's hard to do that when you're when you are owned by an entity.
Exactly. Why do you think it is that when we criticize the jihadist ideology, you immediately get labeled as Islamophobia? And how has fear silenced this honest conversations about Sharia, jihad, political Islam? Can you speak a little bit on that?
I'm so glad you asked this question because I remember, what was it? It was a debate, and this is completely out of context. It was a debate between maybe John Lennox and who was it, Christopher Hitchens or something. There was a moment where he says, and this is back in the 90s, and he says, you better be careful about this word Islamophobia, right? It's going to start circling. I don't agree with anything Christopher Hitchens says, but this one thing, right? This word is going to be weaponized and it's going to be used against you, right? This is before I was even born, he was saying this. And so fast forward to today, if you would ask me this question maybe a couple months ago, I would give you sort of an answer of, well, I believe that it's just a misunderstanding. And no, we're not hating. It's just that we're calling something out for what it is. Daniel, today, I know that it is being used as a leftist Marxist tactic. It is being used to silence because I faced it when I came out of the conservative closet. You're a racist. You're a sexist. You're a bigot. You're a white supremacist. So immediately, you're shut up. Their point is validated, even though they have no point, and the conversation is over. And so that's what I'm seeing is happening. You had a video, actually two in the last couple weeks, where I said Islam is now going woke, right? They're latching onto it. It's like almost like a leftist jihad that they're practicing now. They're using not just our laws against us, free speech, etc. They're using the woke ideology. When you hear a lot of these kids on the college campuses, full hijab and all, they're sounding like yesterday's leftist. Critical race theory is now jihad. And, it's interesting because you got, Queers for Palestine, and then you've got the actual ideology of, the Islamist. And it's like, how does that work out? But they found themselves useful idiots, those who know what's going on, because there are many Muslims who are just ignorant to it as well. They don't actually understand. They have not read through many even of their hadiths or whatever it may be to know what these imams are talking about. All right. And for me, again, I believe that's the greatest danger socially, is to say people falling for this thing of, oh, I don't want to be canceled. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to lose opportunity. Or maybe even more so, especially towards the more feminine side, is I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. And so I'm going to remain silent. But what I would say to you, if you're somebody like that, then I'll say, okay, do you mind not hurting the Jewish people's feelings? Well, no, but the Jewish is a Zionist and they're conquering land and they're apartheid. Okay, so then you don't care about sparing anybody's feelings. You've already chosen a side, right? So yeah, Islamophobia is a tactical weapon, is, manipulation of language that the left is brilliant at.
I'm sure you heard of the term suicidal empathy.
But yeah,
Victor
that's that.
Godson. Yeah, I interviewed a little while back, and I think it perfectly encapsulates what's going on. They'd rather have empathy and die
Yeah.
than to confront exactly what's going on.
You know what's interesting about that? I just want to touch for a second. And I don't know if he says this in the book. I need to get my hands on it because I've been waiting for it for like 2 years. But there's the element of like what the thing seems to be. So with communism, it's like for the people, right? This is a revolution. We are uprooting the past and installing the present. And so it sells itself, in the same way it says like Lucifer shows himself as an angel of light. It demonstrates itself and projects itself as something positive. But then when you actually start to see its practice and its manifestation, you see how dark and twisted it is. And so the suicidal empathy, at the core of it, it's actually incredibly selfish. It's incredibly narcissistic. It's like altruism, right? You have Ayn Rand, and they saw her as a nut job, or she's conceited, talking about individualism. But it's like, yes, that's true and that's honest. The individualist, that's seeing the world from proper perspective, right? When you pretend like we're just going to be altruistic and the state is going to handle everything, then it's okay. Then you are now probably trying to become the state so you can have some sense of agency and control. And so many of these people, I ran into a couple in the middle of Europe, out of all places, and the wife admitted to me that not only did she vote for Zoran, and I could have concluded from the accent that they might have been Jewish. And again, we could talk about leftist Jews forever, and I would love to at some point, which is, there's nobody who is a greater enemy of the Jewish people than a leftist Jew. But this woman is, explaining how Mamdani is so amazing. And then she gets into how she has been going to these, ICE raids, as they call them, which is really just ICE doing its job in essence. And she stands between ICE agents and, these illegals. And, this is a 60-some-year-old woman. I'm thinking to myself, first, logistically, how is this working out? Is she fighting these people? Like, what is going on? and she's proud of it. And you can see this. And to me, I'm like, okay, so this is your suicidal empathy, right? You feel so bad for these guys, so now you're going to become an agent of chaos. It's because it makes you feel good about yourself. Like, it's like almost like a savior complex. It's not about the person. If it was about the individual, then you would let them go through a system the proper way so they can establish themselves and actually have a life instead of forever being on the run. And you would let the police enforcement do their job that they have been called to do by the people who voted for this president, right? But they can't see that because they're so self-centric. So I just want to put it that way, where it's like it's empathy, but it's not really empathy. Because if it was, then it would be for everybody who was going through these devastating situations.
Yeah, they're very selective in their empathy. Usually it's for criminals and terrorists and things like that.
Exactly. Absolutely.
You spoke about the Islamists taking advantage of the liberals and the woke. I'm sure you know that in 1979, the revolution with Khomeini, that's exactly what they did. They had the liberals and the woke helping them, and then once they took over, the first ones to be killed were the liberal and the woke.
Yeah.
So that has played out in history in the past. Now, you have Americans who say, I don't care about foreign policy. It's America for America only. Why should they still care about what's going on in the world, specifically with Iran and Israel and all that?
For the secular individual, I have a different answer than the one who professes to be a faith. For the secular individual, I say because there is no such thing as America only. It's never existed, not even at its inception. We had delegates in France. And if there wasn't those relationships, if Thomas Jefferson didn't spend some time down there, Benjamin Franklin, etc., as essentially liaisons, America would not have made it. I mean, God and God alone, and God is sovereign. But I'm saying, as far as tactically, we had to have allies from the very beginning. Also, there's a story I recently covered of a man by the name of, I believe, Haim Salomon. Happens to be a Jew, moved over to the United States, I believe in 1775, fell in love with this idea of freedom and liberty and, built relationships with the founding fathers. And he actually bankrolled the revolution to the point where they were dead broke. All they needed was like 50 or 20,000 at the time, which is a few, probably 100,000 or million at this point in time. And nobody else was able to get this financing. And he actually brought up some of his own money as well as went out and got the funding to the point where he died broke, $20+ million in debt because they could never pay him back. And so he gave himself financially, right? It's quite ironic because it's like the whole banker stereotype, right? He helped to the point where they would have starved, they would have died out in the cold, multitude of things would have happened if it wasn't for that consequential moment when Commander George Washington needed that financing most. And so even in that moment, I'll say, well, if you want the Jewish roots in America, all you need is just one man, let alone the full entire story, right? In the multitudes of places. Then Black Americans, I'll say, for those who are closely, intimately connected to the civil rights movement, the diasporic Blacks in America, I would say, well, who was standing side by side with you, within the plight with you? Who? I don't think it was the German man. I don't think, no offense. I don't think it was the Nigerian man. I don't think it was many other people, but the Jewish people did, right? So if we want to look historically to the secular individual, I say, look at history in its proper context. And then I would say modern day. Okay, do you care about defense? Who do you think is feeding us information about these jihadists? Who do you think is feeding us information about what's going down the pipelines? Do you think that's just happening? You think it's Qatar, who won't even let us strike from our own base in Qatar? Do you think it's Lebanon? Do you think it's Jordan, Egypt, who we give billions of dollars to yearly? Any of them? I would hope so. But it seems like you've had one who has been consistent in that sort of way, right? We're only mad when obviously, it's like Mossad. Well, you love Mossad when you get the benefits of a Mossad for having that information, right? So your president doesn't get assassinated twice over. Love that information, but as soon as it gets into whatever else realm, now all of a sudden, evil Mossad. And I don't know much about Mossad. They call me Mossad. I wouldn't know if it hit me on the side of the head, right? So that's the secular. To the one in faith, I would say, where do you get your roots? What are you grounded in? Christianity was not an imaginary concept that popped out of nowhere. It was a gradual progression of a fulfillment of prophecy that came directly from a very specific group of people. The first saved individuals, those of the way, are Jews. Every single one of them. Pentecost, the first receival of the Holy Spirit, those 150 were all Jews. It was the gospel first to the Jew and then the Gentile. You like to use the word Christ is king. What is Christ? Well, he didn't start as that word, so you can say Christo. Was he Greek? No, he wasn't. He was Yeshua, HaMashiach, Messiah. Well, did you have an Aryan brother who was speaking Hebrew? No. This is a Jewish Messiah that you have placed your entire life into. Jewish Messiah who came from the lineage of David. It's in your scriptures. Who is David? He is a child of Yisrael, Israel, directly from the tribe of Judah. These are Jews. So your disconnection to the people and the land makes no sense. You are either illiterate as far as your Bible, and I'll say to that, I'm so sorry that the people in your life did not love you enough to actually dig through the scripture with you. Please do so. But if you're somebody who is actively negating this, then I would have to question the authenticity of your faith. I'm not saying you're not saved. I just have to question, where is it coming from? And who is this Messiah that you speak of? Because if it's any other Messiah than Yeshua, then I don't know who we're talking about. There is no Chinese, no Aryan, I don't know any other ethnic. He was not an Ethiopic, though he came for all Jewish. And so again, why would you not have a grounding in the very promises that were made by the God you claim to believe in? If you ask most believers, they will tell you, oh yeah, I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Sure. Then when you start to unpack that and say, okay, then who is this God? And how can you believe in him if you don't believe in his promise? Make it make sense. So again, to my fellow believers, it is ignorance and complete spiritual blindness. And to the secular, who most of them are already spiritually blind, not even interested in a relationship with, the God of this universe, to them I say, if you just care about politics, where are we without our friends? Where are we without our allies? America only is a delusion. You can love your country, and you should respect your country, and you should be somebody who will stand up for it when necessary. But to pretend that your country had its own legs to stand on, ignorance and honestly is hubris. It's arrogance.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, for
Absolutely.
your courage, your bravery, your moral clarity. If you want to leave us with a final message, where could people find you? Uh, yeah, it's all
Well,
yours.
find me everywhere at Tinashe Peter. Takes a little bit of spelling to get to Tinashe, so that's Tinashe, and then Peter as in Peter. And don't forget, it was originally Caiaphas, but Peter's a translation. The message I do want to leave people with is this: whatever side of the aisle, like if you're leftist, you're conservative, if you are believer, non-believer, if you're ethnically this, ethnically that, whoever you are, humble yourself enough to say, I don't know. Let me look at the facts presented to me. And even deeper than that is, I may not even believe that there's a God, but I'm at least willing to have, if there is a God, reveal himself to me, right? At my heart of hearts, and ask. And I believe that he is faithful to answer those who are earnest in seeking. And so ask, continue to ask. Do not be afraid to ask. Don't get tied up in dogma or in the perceptions of the people around you. Ask for yourself. The place that I got to came from asking questions and digging into it. I wasn't satisfied with half the world, 80% of the world. I didn't care how many people were waving those terror flags. I asked and said, what is this about? Why are they doing this? What is October 7th? I don't know. Let me look it up. Let me watch it if I can and come to my own conclusions about it. And so again, stay curious, unhumble yourself enough to let that curiosity lead you.
Thank you so much again. Appreciate your time, and
Absolutely.
hope
Likewise.
we speak again soon.
We definitely will. I appreciate you, brother.